G'day, Geoff Lewis here from Seriously Series, and welcome to another Just Adventure Chat. Here today we're going to be talking to a true global adventurer. He's travelled the length and breadth of America and he's dived into some of the deepest parts of Africa. And where he's travelling now, who knows? But join me as we sit down and have an in-depth chat with the creator of The Road Chose Me, Dan Gregg. It's going to be an incredible chat, so as always, grab yourself a brew of something slightly stronger, but most importantly, stay tuned. So today, ladies and gentlemen, we have Dan from The Road Chose Me, and there's very few parts of the world that this fella hasn't seen, but he's still finding some incredible things off the beaten track. So thank you very much for your time, Dan.
Oh, Geoff, it's a pleasure. It's great to see you again. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Well, we caught up last year, 2022 now, I have to say, at the Perth Four-Wheel Drive show, and you were representing very nicely the Jeep community there. You know, I think it was the only Jeep on display, like ourselves, the only series Land Rover on display. So you obviously gravitate to one another, and you've done some incredible trips over the years, and you've obviously produced them into a fantastic book, YouTube, magazine articles, and all the rest. So I guess for people who haven't come across your work before, how would you sort of describe it and sort of your style and in a brief sort of synopsis?
Yeah, Geoff, I grew up in Australia and I moved over to North America, to Canada, a long time ago. And I realized that sitting at a desk, I used to be an engineer. It wasn't making me happy, and it's not what I wanted to do with my life. And I'd always loved being outside and kind of having adventures, going hiking, going camping. And I came up with this harebrained scheme to drive right up to the top of Alaska and go and check out the Arctic Ocean and explore all over Alaska. And then after I'd completed that, I started looking at maps and you know, like Central America's connected and then South America's not too difficult to get to. And so I ended up driving all the way to the bottom of South America. I just had a little four-wheel drive, a little Jeep, like a ground tent, a box of clothes, a box of food, and nothing else. I didn't have a fridge. I didn't have a winch, partly because I didn't have enough money for all of that stuff, and partly because I just wanted to see what would happen if an ordinary person set out to do something like that. So I saved money for years and years to pay for the trip. And then basically I spent 2 years having adventure every single day and just being out there living. And of course I got addicted and it changed my whole life. Yeah. And so after that, I went back to work and saved up a bunch of money. And then I spent 3 years driving right around the coastline of Africa. And that was insane. It was 1,000 times more adventure than I ever dreamed possible. And incredible, wonderful people, amazing wildlife. And then I went back to work again, saved up money again. And then I've just spent a year and a half driving around Australia.
Wow.
I've explored all the famous and all the remote parts of Australia.
Yeah, that's incredible, Dan. But you know, this sense of adventure, is that something that's always been with you? What was sort of the poignant moment where you went, right, I don't want to work for X amount of years and then, you know, get my super out or whatever it might be, and then just live the generic lifestyle? What was sort of, there must have been a point or a book or something that you read where you went, life's more than this. I need to go and pursue this sense of adventure.
Yeah, there were a couple of moments, Geoff, that I realized in hindsight kind of changed my life. And one of them, when I finished university in Melbourne, I was just so burnt out and so over it that I didn't want to get a real job. And so I actually went to the USA and I worked at a ski resort. I ran the chairlift at a ski resort and, you know, shoveled snow every day and then went snowboarding whenever I wasn't working. And while I was at that ski resort, I met a bunch of people, the guys I lived with, who they'd never been to university, they didn't have much money, but somehow they'd been having all these crazy adventures. They just kind of make it work, whether you have to thumb a ride or you have to like work at McDonald's for a winter because then in the summer you have enough money to go to Alaska. Whatever it was, they were finding a way to have these adventures that I think when I lived in Australia, or especially when I was at university, it just didn't even really occur to me that you could do that if you wanted to. I always thought you just had to go to work.
Yeah,
Um, and then I read a couple of books. So I read Ewan McGregor's book about riding motorbikes around the world with his friend Charlie Borman. But I got really discouraged from that book because, he's an international superstar. They had sponsors, they had border helpers. The trip cost millions of dollars. And so at the end of the book, I thought to myself, it's such a shame I could never do anything like that. And I put the book down, thinking I can't do it. But then I found a book called Jupiter's Travels. And so this guy called Ted Simon in, I think, 1967, he sets out to ride a motorbike all the way around the entire world. He's an ordinary guy. He didn't even have a motorbike license, actually. And he just goes for it. And things go wrong, and he has incredible adventures. He meets unbelievably interesting people. And he spends 4 years riding this inappropriate British motorbike around the world. And at the end of that book, I said to myself, all right, if Ted can do it, then I can do it. So I'm going to try and see what happens.
Yeah, wow. And so your first trip was, as you say, driving from Alaska right down to the tip of South America like that. That would have been sink or swim doing a trip like that. Is that a fair assessment, or you're a bit more sort of geared towards that kind of travel? You've obviously done a little bit internationally before that, or
No, I had never crossed a border. I didn't speak a word of Spanish. No.
Yep.
But even at the time, I wasn't thinking of it as sink or swim because that made it feel kind of too scary or too overwhelming.
Yeah,
Instead, I always just thought of it as like, what am I doing this week?
yeah.
And if I'm enjoying myself and if I feel safe and if I'm having a good time, I'll keep going. Like, what happens after that?
Yeah.
I never really felt like I was this huge, committed, locked in thing that, like, even if it's horrible, I have to keep going. And I kind of always knew I could fall back, like come home and get another job. Like there's always a backup plan. Yeah.
And I guess the other thing is too, you probably weren't doing it to a given schedule either. So when you got there, you got there.
That's the funny thing. My life is a little different these days, but yeah, I had no commitments of any kind. I had no schedule. Basically, I could go until the money ran out, was really my only limiting factor. And so once I got into Mexico and a heaping plate of food is $1 and a cold beer is 50 cents, I was like, oh, hang on a minute. My money's going to last a really long time.
Yeah. It's going to be a bit easier to do this trip than you initially thought.
Yeah, that's right. And I ended up spending less money every month on the road than I had been spending living in a city in Canada, just going to work every day. By the time I was paying like rent and car insurance and food and gym membership, that was like $1,500 a month. When I was on the road, I was only spending $1,200 a month.
That's incredible. That's incredible. And so I guess with this first trip, that was kind of the blueprint of where you've ended up now, this nomadic lifestyle of going out, showing your wonderful adventures, on the likes of YouTube, but also, turning them into books, magazine articles, and all the rest. Is that sort of fair to say?
Yeah, that's right. I always had a passion for photography, although I wasn't very good at it. And so I set myself a goal on that first trip that I blogged for the entire trip. Back then, blogging was kind of a thing. And so twice a week, there was an update on my website with photos and with stories about whatever I'd been up to. And so that kind of laid the foundation for becoming a writer and improving my photography. And yeah, documenting what I do and teaching other people how to do it.
Yeah, and that would have been great too, particularly for your family back here in Australia, just to sort of, where's Dan this week? What's he up to? What challenges?
Yeah, that's right.
To overcome, Oh, he's been to a.
They definitely.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they definitely loved it, and I do recall there were a few occasions where I like censored things and didn't necessarily tell the whole truth because I didn't want to scare my mum too much.
Yeah. And I guess the vehicle that you've done all these incredible trips with, it's not a Land Cruiser, Dan, is it?
No, that's right, Geoff.
What is it? What is it, Dan?
Well, it's actually I've been doing my trips in Jeeps. And there's a bunch of reasons for that, but kind of number one is that they're plentiful over here in Canada,
Mm,
and they're really inexpensive.
mm,
So the one that I drove to Argentina, I bought it for $5,000. I bought it used.
yeah.
I drove it all the way to the bottom of South America, which was 55,000 kilometers. It never broke down once, and then I
Wow.
sold it for $5,000. So
Hey,
so that vehicle was actually free,
yeah.
which
Okay.
so then at the end of that trip, when I kind of started dreaming about going to Africa, I thought, how can you do better than a free vehicle that never broke down? Like
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
so then I bought another one, and I drove that all the way around Africa, and it never broke down in 90,000 kilometers, and actually I still have it here. I drove it yesterday in like 2 feet of fresh snow. It's got 350,000 kilometers on it, still going great.
Wow. And yet,
Yeah, so
the motors in those Jeeps, it's real brutal truck American engineering. They can do a million miles and not look twice, you know.
I wouldn't quite go that far.
Okay.
Um, yeah, yeah, and actually, the one I have now, it has a relatively modern V6 in it. It's
Oh,
fuel injected, and yeah, and it runs great, and never had a problem.
right. And the Jeeps that you've used up to this point, are they diesel? Are they petrol?
They've actually all been petrol so far.
Yeah, right. And have you
Yeah,
found any advantages or disadvantages going petrol with your travels?
I feel like it's kind of 50-50.
Mm,
Diesel's often cheaper around the world.
mm,
Diesels typically are a bit more reliable and kind of, longer lasting. So
mm,
you could probably have one for 500,000 kilometers, and not expect to do any rebuild work on the engine.
mm.
Um, but what I found in Africa is that it's really only the heavy transport trucks that are diesel. And because they have 1,000-kilometer range, you won't find diesel for sale other than in the really big places with the big highways where the trucks are. If you
Interesting.
go into the tiny little villages, everyone's riding Chinese scooters and they're selling gas or they're selling petrol in like 1 liter Coke bottles. And so it kind of doesn't matter where you are in Africa, you will always find petrol for sale, but you may not find diesel,
There
strangely
you go.
enough.
There you go. That's interesting. That's interesting. So with all these trips, is there a particular sort of element of it that really, you know, encapsulates why you do it? Is it the experience? Is it the people that you meet, or the places themselves, or a little bit of everything there?
I think it's a little bit of a blend. Like it
Mm,
depends on the week, it depends how I'm feeling. But
mm,
for me, getting as far away from kind of the world as I can get has always really excited me. Whether it was the canning stock route in Australia or the salt flats in Bolivia or certain parts of Africa where you can go well over a week without seeing another vehicle or any kind of building or electricity or anything.
mm.
That kind of interests me and gets me excited. And then the other one, especially in Africa, was the people.
Yeah,
Unbelievable to drive into a tiny little village where people live in mud huts and they just welcome you in and try to offer you food and, oh yes, you can camp here and welcome, these are my
wow.
children. And it just the most amazing feeling of, I look vastly different than they do and I'm driving this big four-wheel drive and they're just unbelievably kind and welcoming to me. And for no reason. They don't want money or they're not trying to get
Yeah,
anything.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
They're just friendly people.
And that's actually quite amazing, that sort of generosity there too, because we would consider them to be, somewhat poor, but obviously they're still very rich people in their own way. But what the little they have, they're inviting you in, making a cup of tea or whatever, giving what they can to sort of enrich your own experience, which is awesome.
Absolutely, yeah, Geoff. It was really life changing. A few times it was late in the afternoon and I was a bit
Mm,
tired and by myself, and the fear creeps in and you start wondering, hey, I'm in Angola here. This is maybe not very safe. Maybe I shouldn't be doing this.
mm,
And then people just treat you as if they've known you your whole life, and it felt like visiting family. And you're just in the middle of nowhere in Angola or the Congo or wherever, and to be
yeah.
treated that way was utterly incredible. It's something I'll never forget as long as I live.
And as we've talked about off camera, that kind of flies in the face of the stereotype that we've all been led to believe, particularly by Hollywood and a lot of the productions there too. but I'm sure, as far-fetched as Hollywood is and the stereotypes themselves, there's obviously been some difficult situations you've found yourself in, but also some quite remarkable situations you've found yourself in too. What would you say would be the most difficult and the most remarkable situation that you found yourself in up to date? It's a difficult one.
Probably the most difficult, Geoff. When I was in Uganda, I made some really bad decisions that resulted in the Jeep flopping over on its side.
Oh no.
And I was all alone, like on this dirt road in the middle of nowhere. And I honestly thought that was it. I destroyed the Jeep and the trip was over. And so I started thinking about, I guess I'm just going to take out my passport and my money and like start walking.
Wow.
I didn't even know where I was going to walk to.
Wow.
Yeah, and I was very upset and kind of overwhelmed.
Mm.
But a bunch of locals showed up, as they always do in Africa, and they were like, "Oh yeah, we'll just push on it." It's too heavy. That'll never work. And so we ran a winch line to a tree, which kind of wasn't the best angle, but it was all I could do. And with the winch and them pushing on the side, it actually came back up on its wheels, no problem at all. I let it sit for a couple of hours before I started it up, and I've been driving it ever since. I literally didn't break a window, didn't bend any of the suspension. I had to weld the rear view mirror back on. That snapped off, and I put some duct tape on a few places, and that's it.
Wow, that's incredible. And with a vehicle like that, you can't sell it. It's part of the family now. All those stories and all the rest. It'll be a difficult time when you have to part with it.
Yeah, and I'm at that point now. Actually, it's a really difficult decision, but where I live here in Canada, I don't have anywhere to store it, so it's literally parked on the street with about a foot of snow on it. So it's slowly kind of rusting away under all the snow, and I've got a new one now, so I have to decide.
Oh, right. Move on to the next thing.
You're right, though. It's very hard. I wish I could keep it forever, but it just doesn't work out that way.
No. Well, unless you put a lot of fish oil on it every day, but that's work.
And the other thing too, if I sell it, I can just turn that cash into the next adventure. And so I have to think about, do I want to collect cars or do I want to have adventures?
That's a good point.
And I kind of only have enough money for one or the other.
That's true, unless you own Land Rovers, where they just multiply. I don't know how they do it, Dan, but they just do. But I guess so. You've recently become a father, which is awesome. Where do you see your next adventure, or where do you see the road chose me? Where's the next adventure sort of leaning towards there?
We're definitely planning another big adventure, kicking off this year, probably middle of this year, 2024.
Mm-hmm.
But we haven't actually announced where we're going yet.
Okay, fair enough.
Because remember when we said when I drove to South America, there was no pressure and there was no timeline.
Yeah.
I kind of prefer to live life that way, because right now, with the war in Russia, with what's happening in Israel, visas are hard to get for some parts of the world. Travel's not safe and difficult. And so it feels like even best laid plans might fall apart and I might not be able to undertake the trip I want to. So what I'm actually doing is I have about 3 trips that I'm working towards. I'm getting shipping quotes. I'm organizing, visas and what are we going to do? And we're going to do one of them. We don't actually know which one it is yet until closer to the date. And then we're just going to go and do it.
Good on you. And look, even here in Australia, with the permits and that you have to get to, I think it's a similar mentality you have to adopt. Have a few irons in the fire and then see which one actually goes. But
I think so. And from an Australia context, whether you wind up on Fraser Island or whether you wind up in Cape York, like, it's not as if one of them is bad, or it's not like second choice. It's like both of them are incredible and you'd be ecstatic. It doesn't matter which one you do, just as long as you get out and do something.
Oh, definitely. And I think that encapsulates everything that you've done up to this point, Dan. It is all about the experience. It doesn't matter where you are. It's about the experience that you actually have undertaking that adventure. But I guess if politics aside, wars and conflict and all the rest, if there was one place in the world that you could go to, didn't cost any money wasn't an option, where would you take the Jeep? Where would you?
I'm fascinated by Central Asia, Geoff. So like Kazakhstan, Mongolia, kind of Azerbaijan,
Yeah.
Friends actually, Lee and Steph from
Oh, yes.
Grizzly and Bear Overland.
Yep.
They spend a lot of time in that part of the world, and they talked my ear off about it. And
Mm.
so it's I know that I will get there one day. I just don't know when. I don't know how.
Yeah, yeah. And it's one of those parts of the world, like 20 years ago, it was very much untouched and still is
Mm.
very much today. But as you would know, Dan, there's certain encroaches of Western sort of media and civilization sort of moving into that. So it'd be one of those parts of the world, I'm sure, that you'd want to get to sooner rather than later.
Yeah, and it's incredible how fast the world is changing.
Oh,
I see people who are driving to South America now, and they visit places that I went to, and they're almost not recognizable.
wow.
And yeah, when I drove the west coast of Africa, I met up with a couple in South America who had done it about a year before me, and so we were comparing notes about some of their hardest segments on the road. In this jungle track in the mud and difficult. And I thought about it for a while, and I'm like, oh, that was a paved 2-lane highway with toll booths, and it was only a year later it had changed that much.
Wow. That's
Yeah,
incredible. That's
yeah,
incredible. And that's the hard thing too. You almost don't want to go back and revisit places because, well, the experience isn't going to be the same, but it's going
right.
to almost make it a little bit not worse, but might diminish sort of the memories that you actually have of driving down that particular road or reaching that particular spot.
Yeah, and I wonder if I ever do go back, maybe I'll just intentionally go to places that I didn't go to before. You
Yeah,
know,
yeah,
look at the map of whatever country and be like, okay, now I'm going to go to all the other bits of that country that I didn't
yeah.
get to see last time.
And look, I totally agree with that too. Like I did the Simpson Desert in Cape York 20 years ago, and
Yep.
I have no inclination of going back anytime soon because I know it's not going to be anything like the places I saw then. So why not go see another part of the world? So
Yeah.
with all this great adventure in that, Dan, people should be so inspired to go out and buy one of your incredible books and more. But if they're wanting to see something right here, right now, where can they go and see it? Where can they follow you on YouTube and social media and your website and more?
Yeah. So I'm online, Geoff, as The Road Chose Me.
Road
And so
shows.
that is my YouTube, and there's videos there from every country in Africa, from all of Australia, and a whole bunch of videos about how to do this kind of thing, like
Mm,
how to save money, what visas you need, how much it costs, bribery, safety, money, languages, kind of
yep,
like all the questions people always ask me. I've
yep.
tried really hard to film videos to teach people how to do it themselves. And then I've got Instagram as well. The Road Chose Me. And then, yeah, I've got some books for sale on Amazon about the adventures that I've undertaken. And they're written from the perspective of trying to help people get out and do it themselves. So,
Mm.
sort of teaching them what they need to know while showing them this is what it actually feels like to go on these kind of big, grand adventures.
Oh, definitely. And you give, as we've talked about, a very real account of what it's actually like. And as we've mentioned too, the sort of one cardinal rule through that, and that is sort of almost calling them out in particular in regards to border crossings and all the rest, where they're just being a bit absurd. Get to the truth of the matter. So yeah, no, it's great stuff, Dan, and keep up the work. And we're all looking forward to your next adventure and more. And we'll definitely have to catch up soon. But thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Geoff. I really appreciate it. Yeah, it's great talking to you again.
Yeah, likewise. Talk soon. See ya.
Thanks.